Right, I think we can start with introductions. The team that you can see on the videos, and we will teach you just now how to get rid of all the videos and just see Glenn's presentation. On the one side, you'll see Saskia Nishan. Saskia is our Chief Operating Officer, and she's also looking at the emails, if there's any emails coming in for this session at the moment. Saskia, do you want to say hello?
Hi guys, looking forward to this session and can't wait to see what Glenn is going to teach us all. But if there's any questions, info@innovationsummit.coza is the mail. We'll keep an eye on that. Any suggestions on improvements going forward in the series will be much appreciated. And welcome.
Yeah, and I think she's using a photo because she doesn't have any makeup because she's working from home. That's my theory.
That's correct.
And then Buntu is our director at the Innovation Summit, and he has written a book, How to Start Your Business in 90 Days, and he is managing this session for us. Buntu, do you want to say hi?
Thanks, Audrey. Welcome, everybody. Hope you do have a good day. I see some people as well I recognize there. Hi, William. Hi, Thomas. But yeah, I think also it would be great if you want to share others to join that haven't made it here. We are live on Facebook at the SA Innovation Summit. And the video will also be available afterwards if you want to share it and go through it again. But looking forward to Glenn's presentation, definitely. Hope you
welcome,
enjoy.
Alan Mukoki. It's wonderful that you could join us as well. So I am Audrey Verhagen, the chair of the SA Innovation Summit, and we started this series to encourage and support entrepreneurs across Africa. In this time of coronavirus, we're doing it for free to support you with information that we think is very valuable for you right now. So our second speaker in this series is Glenn Gillis. Glenn is an all-time friend and favorite at the SA Innovation Summit. He's a thought leader in virtual reality and augmented reality. And Glenn is going to help us think, how can we digitalize what we're doing currently, which I think is putting stress on most businesses at the moment if your business was not digital already. So Glenn, I want to hand over, and you are welcome to take control of this session and your presentation. And just for everybody, if you want to get rid of the videos in your frame, then you'll see 3 blocks over your videos, and you can press the small block, the thin line, and that should give you the maximum exposure of the frame as Glenn will take you through his presentation.
Hi, good morning, everybody, and thank you very much indeed. It is, it's a pleasure to be able to spend the next while with you, and it's a new first for me too. So I hope that what you can see in front of you is something called Reimagining Your Business. Audrey or Buntu, if you can just confirm that everybody can see that.
We can see
coming
that.
Through my side.
Okay,
if anybody
perfect.
can't see it, they must go to chat and let us know.
Cool. All right. So yeah, hard to do these things without being able to gaze lovingly into each other's eyes. But I guess as we practice these skills in the new digital world and the reality that we face, we've just got to do the best we can. So thank you, and please, let's forgive me if I make some mistakes or kind of we don't get this exactly right. But yeah, I think that's what the new world is all about. So yeah, really what we're going to chat about today is just a kind of holistic way to think about the new business, about your business, about some of the things that we've picked up over the last couple of years. We've been around for almost 9 years now and have been sort of at the forefront of augmented reality, particularly because that's a very mature technology. We understand it very well, and we're going to share a couple of case studies with you guys, some ways to think about it. We're going to talk about VR, virtual reality. That's on everybody's mind at the moment, and we'll talk through some of what we believe is possible now, some of the stuff that is in urgent development, some of these things we've always wanted, and now there's clear and present use cases for them. We'll talk about why games are important in all of this, And that's some of the experiences that we have. So yeah, thank you again. And I'm going to go for about 30 to 40 minutes at the very most, and then hopefully take as many calls or sort of questions as we can. So yeah, delighted to have this opportunity. So thank you very much. It's a crazy world out there, and I don't know about you, but we want to be part of a new narrative now more than ever. We want to be part of a new story that South Africans are telling themselves, that Africa is taking to the world, and frankly, that the world is trying to figure out as we go. And what we know is that change is always about a new story, which can happen in a large organization or at a social level. A brand is really about the stories that people tell. We know also that companies themselves are not really about their rules and systems and policies, but actually it's those stories that kind of glue them together. And so now more than ever, stories really are how we make sense of the current world and how we make sense of the future world. And if you think about it, stories really have always kind of done one of four main things. And we could, you know, talk about the finesse around this and what's real and what's not. But you know, I need to tell you that over that hill where you can't see, there are buffalo that graze freely. I need to keep you entertained around the fire at night, and I need to communicate with you if I want to kind of trade and exchange things with you. And so these four reasons have really been fundamentally true for the longest amount of time. And technology really only changes how we tell these stories, but not really why we tell stories. And so this is the why. On the how, we're now seeing that technology that is becoming more visual, it's becoming mobile first, it's contextual, certainly in terms of social media and these devices. We have power in our hands. Sometimes we wonder, do we have the agency? I guess the disease that we all are gripped with is hopelessness. Do we feel that through our own actions, we can influence the world around us, whether we're sitting in a corporate somewhere, whether us just as individuals? And again, we all feel so powerless, I guess, with what's happening in the world around us at the moment. And of course, what's really critical over the last couple of weeks has been the rise of remote. So technology, like never before, has been stress tested to see, are we ready for this new world? So one of the things that's really important is that if we're going to talk about interactivity, how then do people make sense of that? How do we create a system of rules around interactions? Well, one way that humanity's been doing that for the longest time is by using games, because they have a goal, we can agree what that feedback looks like. And these are some of the four main characteristics of a game. As they say, you know, there are many ways to define it, but this is one way of looking at it. And so if you think about the rise of interactivity, you can see why it's so intimately related to things like games and gamification or human-centered design. The one thing that really makes a game different from everything else is that it is largely driven by voluntary participation. And that's a massive idea if you think about it, because its opposite is called work, and that's kind of why they have to pay us to do that. So I just want you to hold that one idea in your head while as we go to the next sort of model, that, like, imagine if so many things in our lives were driven by voluntary participation. And that's kind of going to come back again when we start talking about VR and why that's important in that context. So I'm a recovering consultant, so I love my matrices. This is one we developed many years ago. I was doing some work for the IDC actually at the time around the creative economy. And the more that we spend time thinking about the knowledge economy, the creative industries more generally, I don't know to what extent this applies to physical manufacture. I'll leave that to those of you out there who are in physical manufacturing. But if I could say to you, just take, you know, you're going to get a copy of the deck afterwards, and we're happy to talk about it. But this is an incredibly powerful way to kind of think about the world. And what we're going to do over the course of the next few minutes is really take a bit of a deep dive into this model. So as I said, down the left-hand side, you have somebody comes up with an idea, you've got to get some money, then we've got to make the thing, and we've got to sell it and distribute it. So in its very, very simplest form, that's the value chain that we kind of all follow in some variation or another. So highly simplified. Technology dramatically influences those things. So I would say to you things like Netflix, which is really around a sales and distribution disruptor, influences the concept. And production is influenced by what's possible with the technology. And, you know, so these three highly sort of summarized views of the value chain are constantly interacting with each other and influencing each other, and are really driven by changes in technology. However, the big why does not change. And those are the four main reasons that, you know, we suggest our why stories have always shaped the way we think about things. So we're going to come back to this model, and I'm going to use it as a framework for the conversation. So we're going to go through concept. We're going to talk through some ways to think differently about what you do. Production will be about how we do things differently, how we make things differently. We'll talk to you about some of the considerations in terms of augmented and virtual reality specifically, because that's kind of a flavor that we want to kind of give to this. And then sales and distribution, we'll just give you some ideas about some of the things that we're noticing in terms of trends and change. Just before I go into the next section, Buntu, I just want to do a tech check with you and see that everything's working and it's coming across clearly.
Sure. Yeah, everything my side, I'm able to visually see clearly. I can hear you as well. I do want to invite participants. If you are having any technical challenges, please feel free to drop in the chat, and we can see how to address it if you can confirm. Oh, great. I'm getting confirmation from the attendees that everything is okay.
All right. Excellent. Great to hear.
Great.
So if we took a little bit of a deeper dive into concept, and what we've done here is really just shared some thoughts about high-level trends, as I mentioned. If we start with social, so this is everything from all the social media that is out there. And again, I don't need to spend too much time on it because I guess we're all feeling completely overwhelmed by the psychic load at the moment and everything that we're going on there. There's this constant debate. So if you're in the news media, and I want to just give a shout out to Daily Maverick, for example, who are just continuing to deliver quality journalism, despite like a business model which doesn't quite stack up, but we do hope them. And of course, there's this overload of noise out there and all the fake news that goes around that. And you know, ultimately, it's the battle for trust. Who do we trust? And you know, you've got some of the biggest brands in the world who have got very sophisticated marketing efforts, and yet we seem to trust some pimply teenager who unboxes the latest technology and their opinion somehow matters. Well, I've never quite understood why that is. I don't know what influencers do, and the data doesn't seem to support that there are, in fact, you know, positive correlations between behavior change. But clearly we're in this trust cycle. It's the Edelman Trust Barometer. If you haven't seen their work, it is incredible. And they've been tracking trust across so many different spheres for the longest time. So from government and elsewhere, you know, trust is at historic lows, and yeah, we're battling to find new relevance in those things. And of course, it's you know, negative beats positive every day. Just, you know, that's always been true of newspapers and so on, and it's now more than ever. Yeah, but just to where our passion lies is really in this idea about where entertainment can influence your concept. And so what are the things that we can kind of learn from that space? And, you know, if you think even about a conference, one like the Innovation Summit, you know, they've worked incredibly hard, as have others, about creating a community that kind of lives around this shared passion for innovation and change. Yes, we hopefully pay to attend, but you're there because you've chosen that event over many others. But I think if you zoom out on all of that, what we know fundamentally is that if you want to shift behavior, you do that because of a relationship with archetype. Psychologists have known this for the longest time. And archetype really is just character, and character's obviously what drives story. And that's why we're seeing the rise of narrative in everything. So even our geek friends in IT are using words like user stories, user personas, and we're borrowing terminology really from the entertainment industry, and we're kind of applying that in some sense, or sort of from the story industry, and we're applying that because it seems to be a much simpler way to make sense of things rather than at a very sort of technical level. I've mentioned the rise of interactivity before, and I guess the explosion of choice for those of us lucky enough to, you know, have access to the internet and have some money. You know, we can choose so many platforms these days. And I would suggest to you that almost all entertainment is driven mostly by some sort of intrinsic connection that we have with the story, with the characters, with the choice. So hold that idea in mind as we transition to really thinking about, okay, so where's the money in all of this? You know, where's the business in all of this? Well, I know it's hysterical, but brands are supposed to be about trust. So from its earliest days, Sunlight soap, the pure soap, you know, had a brand on it, and we knew that we could trust that soap over every other one. Yet Edelman's barometer is showing us that even our trust in brands has been massively corroded. But I think that we shouldn't reinvent the wheel. We should stick to what we know to be true. And that is that, you know, brands really should be out there earning our trusted relationships. And again, during this crisis, you know, we're thankful that there are Checkers and Pick and Pay and others are a source of trust for us. We know that they're doing their best to protect their staff and so on. And of course, there's this is the basis of the exchange of all value. You know, I'll pay you something because it's kind of worth something for me. Yet marketing has almost always been driven mostly by a very hard push, you know, competitions, discounts, promotions. I would suggest to you that there are no loyalty schemes out there, none. Even Discovery's Vitality, which is so good, they are all really reward schemes, and all they're doing is giving us an extrinsic reward for our behavior. Really, loyalty is earned, rewards are bought. So you see where this connection between intrinsic and extrinsic. And who knows, we were so caught up in the experience economy, and I think we will continue to be for the longest time. I don't know what those experiences look like. And I guess this is why augmented and virtual reality are now at the forefront, because, yeah, as we adjust to the new normal, who knows what those future experiences look like. And then finally, our passion at Sea Monster, and I guess the community that binds us really around the Innovation Summit, is that we all have this massive passion to share our knowledge and to openly and continuously learn and embed that in everything that we know. And what we know is that the traditional systems that we have put in place, these medieval institutions, universities and schools, really are not coping with the rate of change. And if we thought that they were struggling before, they really are struggling now more than ever. And yet we see the rise of homeschooling, where parents are stepping into that void and doing the best they can to juggle 17 balls at the same time. And really what we've always wanted to do is not know something. We actually just want to do something. The knowledge is freely available out there. In fact, there's almost too much knowledge. So back to this idea about quality and versus quantity, whereas really the new definition of learning is being able to do something that you couldn't do before. So these are very abstract ideas, but what I'd like to do, with your permission, is just show you a couple of examples of how we've applied this with 2 organizations, and then maybe we can pick this up and talk more about it. But I'll leave it to you guys to think about how it applies in your particular business. So 2 examples that we had. The first is with FNB, and we're really, really privileged to be part of this process. It's called Fundaba, and if you haven't checked it out, please do. You can just log into the very light login to FNB. You don't need to be an FNB client. It's free to everybody. And it's really those 12 conversations that we've all had 100 times with our friends and family and so on around, have you got a business? What does it take to start up? It's quite simple. We haven't made it more complicated. We want to make it as accessible as possible. And it's really this idea of this MBA in a day. And we follow young Lebo. It's story driven. It was very, very tightly researched. We understand exactly what kind of entrepreneur Lebo is. You know, he's not a survivalist. So there was aspirational elements into what Lebo wanted to do with his life. And we built out with them essentially trapping all the knowledge which is in the minds of people within at FNB, and then their partners and ours in this, which was Edge Growth, who I'm sure you all know, hell of a knowledgeable, lots of practical experience. And between us, we were essentially able to harvest all these stories that sit in the minds of people and find a way to kind of package it up, make it engaging and useful to people. And we've added in infographics and worksheets. And I'm super privileged to say that we managed to do it in 5 languages. It was the first for the First Rand Group to put something out of this scale in multiple languages, as their group policy, as many others are for practical reasons, just to speak in 1 language. So we managed to get it out in 5 languages. But yet now I can see what people are consuming. I can see if a aspirant entrepreneur, where they're struggling, which module they're going to. So things that we've always been able to do in learner management systems, we're now making possible and using that to inform business decisions. So it wouldn't be complicated to imagine how we can start to see patterns in the data between where people are going, how they are completing worksheets, business model canvas, you know, various things that we've kind of put out there. And we can start to see patterns in the data. So as FNB scales this, this might be an entirely new way to make sense of the knowledge, the relationships, and ultimately we might be able to get to a point where that good old idea that we had, where a bank manager would be able to look somebody in the eye and say, I know you're good for that. And that's really the thinking that kind of underpins this. And so, yes, it's a marketing effort, but it's really leveraging the trust that FNB has got, creating voluntary engagement to create an exchange of real value. So you see what we did there and tied together a few different concepts. The second one is with Capitec, and very similar sort of point of departure, different application. And this was a full game, whereas the other was really a suite of animation and podcasts. This was really about saying, look, it's actually not about Capitec. So if you look at those screens, you would maybe get a subtle hint that, okay, like if I had to choose a bank, but there is very subtle Capitec branding in a game, just to promote that trust and that credibility. I'll say to you that our client here is the head of data, not the head of marketing. And yes, it's coming out of their CSI spend, but it is driving a strategic business outcome. So this is not Akshem, a nice donation, you know, here you go. This is really trying to drive an understanding of those little decisions that we make. And so in a nutshell, the game is all about pimping your life and upgrading your life. And as you do that, there's a break-in, something went wrong, you renting, you might want to pay for a deposit. So how do you kind of see that? And again, we're at a very, very nuanced level. We're actually measuring a lot of things about resilience and all of those those wonderful words we use, we're now actually getting data proxies for those, and we're wondering how that will inform their future credit model. The numbers come down from 20 minutes of engagement, and I didn't get that wrong. It's hovering at about 14 minutes at the moment. So again, the power of voluntary engagement. Hundreds of thousands of sessions, each session about 12 to 14 minutes, depending on which gameplay you go in. That's not 1.4 minutes or 1.4 seconds in terms of how animation, marketing is, digital marketing is traditionally. That's minutes, okay? And that's just an astounding thing. Okay, so that's bringing us up to just before 10:30. So we're all on track. And let's shift now to, okay, so how do we make this? All right, so if we've got all these fancy ideas, how does that really impact kind of the production side of things? And again, if we go back to that model, let's just put some trends and ideas out there, and then we can go from there. So social, we know, okay, everybody is telling their story in some form or another, whether it's Facebook or even all the educational content on YouTube, or it's just incredible to think. And of course, Wikipedia. So if you think education and social meet each other, and then some sort of intrinsic connection that exists between those two. So people are almost subscribing or contributing to Wikipedia for mostly social reasons, but they're driving educational outcomes. Who would have thought that that would ever have worked? But how do you curate that? You know, how do you kind of create the community around that? How do you sift through that? And again, these are challenges that are true to social media in a very big way. I'm going to skip entertainment because I'll use that as an introduction to the AR VR section that we're going to get to next. But if you think about commercial communication specifically, and you can think about, you know, as this applies to your business, certainly from a marketing perspective, unfortunately, it's still very shouty. And I don't know if you've noticed, but those companies that couldn't switch off their advertising quick enough with the corona epidemic, how obvious it was to everybody how disconnected they were. And that's an indication, I guess, of that, the slowness of that one-way communication, you know, having people dancing in the aisles and pushing 2-for-1 discounts seemed so disconnected. But the reason is because the way that marketing has always worked has been quite slow and kind of one-directional. Social media, of course, has changed that. And yet, ultimately, the real experience is the one that really informs the brand specifically. And companies that are standing up now, I think, are earning our true loyalty. So people who are going out there and zero rating, you know, domains, doing interesting things around commercial models, just, you know, not paying out dividends, having salary cuts for executives. All of these things are giving us very real indications of what really builds brands and really builds that. But let me get back to the production realities, because if you go to the educational sector, this is really the front line of this challenge. You know, we talk about there not being enough money to change the educational model. Really? You know how much money South Africa spends per capita on education? Probably more than any other country in the world, and yet we achieve such dismal results. So it's such a clear example to us that we don't have a production challenge. We have some of the best e-learning people in the world running companies out of South Africa. We have our young teachers teaching all over China, Taiwan, Vietnam, wherever they might be. We don't have a production challenge. What we have is a business challenge, and you can see how those two things kind of relate to each other. But let me move away sort of from the conceptual stuff and start talking about, okay, how do we actually do this? And again, I'll go back to our experience, which talks to industrialized kind of creative processes that we've learned really from the TV production industry. And if you want good producers, they're a dime a dozen now. and they come out of that industry because they're able to continually deliver engaging content for, frankly, very little money. It looks expensive, but when you scale it, it becomes cents in the rand. And of course, this is where technology has made such a big difference. And I'm going to take a bit of a deep dive now into the AR VR space. So just to be clear, there's a whole lot of terminology out there. And just so for everybody, we're all on the same page. AR is about putting a digital image into the real world. So you need a device. Typically, it's a mobile device. There's no way currently to beam images directly into your brain. So when you see some of these things on the internet, be very skeptical about it, because understand that it is always being viewed through a device. Currently, you need an app, whether that app is Facebook, for example, and you swipe right and it fires up the camera. That is a very basic AR engine right there. Otherwise, you need to download an app, and there's just no getting around it. The web AR technology is starting to mature, but it is very slow and frankly quite disappointing in terms of what's possible, and not yet possible with web AR. So we can essentially get away from this idea of an app. Guys, there are 1 billion plus AR devices out there, many more than that, in fact. They're called smartphones, and we have the distribution. We have the technology. Really, what we're struggling with is conceptual challenges, which are informing production challenges. And don't use AR and VR in the same sentence, because AR, hell of a mature. VR actually just starting to come out of the disappointment curve. We've built a number of these things over the last few years, and we've tested a lot of devices. We understand they've been desktop devices. So think the HTC Vive as an example. What a lot of people are experiencing as so-called VR is actually 360-degree photographs, sort of a photosphere, if you like. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But it hasn't really been until the Oculus Quest, which was released in July last year, that we got the first truly all-in-one wireless VR device, which was really not a disappointment, frankly, and we've built a couple of things onto it. Again, you need the device. If you don't have a device, how are you going to access VR? It's not mysteriously going to kind of, again, get beamed into your brain just here. So think about AR. And by the way, they talk about MR, which is just mixed reality, which is really just kind of flicking backwards and forwards between a version of AR and VR. And then XR, I don't know what the hell that means, you know, so somebody will tell me, but it's I guess, an extension of mixed reality. So don't let the ARs and VRs confuse you, and don't let anyone pretend they know more than they do, because this is new and emerging for all of us. We're super proud to be the Reserve Bank's digital education partner, and we launched last year this app with them. It won the world's most boring award. No, just kidding. They love it, and we're very proud of it. But it was the biggest public sector educational, the best public sector educational effort last year for any reserve bank anywhere in the world. So we are super, super proud of it. And it's you have a target in your pocket. It's a banknote. Maybe you're not carrying them around with you, but look for the ones with the young Mandela on the background, in the background, and download this app. And there's the whole story of Mandela. There's all the features of the banknote, from the design features, and all of this was designed to throw down a data layer so that we could inform a much more nuanced strategy around kids and the informal sector and the cash management sector. So I can't tell you too much more about that, but you can get how a data-driven organization like the SARB, and rest assured, these are some of the most professional people we've ever dealt with, and they take their mandate extremely seriously. So this is not a little toy. This has got very practical experiences, and we built this out. So a couple of things you need to think about is what's popping up there. You'll see quite a lot of what's popping up. It's just 2D stuff. So that's just you scanning a note. So you're using your camera to recognize an image. That is then popping up a 2D or 3D digital asset on top of that, and it's tracking that. So as you move the banknote around, it's sticking the digital asset to that. And there's a lot that's possible. AR has matured, and some higher end devices are now able to track surfaces. So where there's a uniform sort of surface, a floor, for example, some of the higher end devices are saying, look, I don't need your target anymore. It's called surface tracking, and I can just drop an image into the real world. And this technology is progressing massively. So we really are seeing almost the birth of AR 3.0, and we're on the cusp of that. So watch Apple, watch the announcements in a couple of weeks. There's rumored to be a device coming out. You already do have an AR device. They're thinking of some AR VR device. But what's really happening is we're agreeing on a standard for the digital assets, because there is no MPEG, there is no JPEG formalization yet. And so we haven't yet seen the creation of these specific 3D objects and how they're going to be working across the Android and Apple ecosystem. So watch this space. AR, this is the space to be in. There's lots of use cases for us to be in. But of course, what's on everyone's mind is virtual reality. 20 minutes to go, 23 minutes. I'll just pick up a little bit of speed here. This is made up, but it is useful. It's just one way to think about the VR landscape and the opportunities that might be out there. So from the left-hand side, I want to just make the real world as real as possible. Those are the simulations. So those are hyper-realistic, potentially, scenarios that replicate the real world very precisely. And as we move down that experience, really, I'm abstracting, I'm exaggerating the environment, I'm speeding things up. And that's where games and game-like thinking is going to become very, very useful. And if you think about applications, then as we go to the bottom of that side, okay, so the professional training, the hard skills, the things that are dirty and dangerous are very particularly well suited. So you see a lot of applications in oil and gas, nuclear facilities, big industries are really embracing virtual reality. What we've yet to see is really a lot of that soft engagement. Yes, you're seeing entertainment stuff, but the serious gaming stuff really is where the whole opportunity emerges. And of course, if you're thinking about virtual conferences, virtual meetings, then how are those things, those softer engagement things, going to work in a virtual world? And there's a huge amount going on at the moment. We're very, very privileged to be part of a closed a VR user group globally of about 250 companies, little companies that are all trying to solve virtual meetings in some form or another, virtual conferencing. And they're each taking one little element of that challenge and trying to solve for that. It's no coincidence that the social network, Facebook, paid $2 billion for Oculus and has spent probably the same again developing it. So we do laugh a little. We get a call probably once a week now, at the moment once a day. Hey man, I've got an idea. I want to use VR for social media and social networking. I'm like, gee, that's never occurred to anybody. But of course, if you think about it, that's what it's always been about. But what does that actually mean? Okay, because 360-degree photographs really are just, you know, anybody can do them. Just go and buy a camera, slap it onto your phone or whatever, and just make a photosphere. And you can look around the photosphere, and maybe you can drop a couple of hotspots so you can have very, very basic interaction. But actually, if I want to start interacting with that world in some way, then really I've crossed into a digital world where those digital assets need to be created in some form or another. 1 second. Thanks. And so what you're looking at here is actually both digital versions of Cape Town. So on the right, it might look to you that you're looking at a photograph of Table Mountain and the cable car, but in fact you're not. You're looking at a totally digital twin of the CBD of Cape Town and of Table Mountain. So if those of you who've not been on Google Earth recently, I'd highly encourage you to go back there, and you're going to have as wow experience as you did the first time you saw it, because it's truly amazing. And we did a variety of different scans, and then what you're doing is you're wrapping over that this texture for each of these rocks, and we went through a very complicated process. And I believe it is in the public domain that the Cape Town Cable Car Company, or Table Mountain Cableway Company, has a VR experience in development, and it's ready to go. And yes, we did make it for them, and it's very interesting to see. But you can see hyper realistic. The real challenge is, how do you build those worlds? And by the way, we can switch the clouds on and off. We can make it day and night. Now, because it's a digital world, you can kind of interact with it. So when you're thinking VR, think about who's going to build the whole world and what that whole world is going to look like. It doesn't have to be us, but you have to build it in a very particular way. And I'll tell you more about that. On the left-hand side, you can see that what we've done is we've exaggerated Cape Town. So this was part of a prototype that we built for Air France, and we've got some very interesting applications for this coming up. So watch this space, but you get the idea. This looks like a little touristy map, but this is a digital asset. We can zoom right into it. So whether this is us in augmented reality, popping it onto the floor, for example, and looking around it, or inside out, popping us into the middle of Cape Town to scale and looking around these buildings, it's the same thing. AR uses it in one way, VR uses it in another. And now we got to start thinking, okay, well, geez, I've got to put clothes on these people. I've got to have props. So this, again, what that means, a prop is something that you interact with in some form or another. So the shirt on the left and the one on the right are identical, as you can see. The one on the left actually has about 20 million odd polygons. So in order to give that shape and texture and lighting and all of the things that make a shirt look like a shirt, what 3D specialists will do is they'll make a polygon, literally a rectangle, and then they'll make as many of those as they can. And then each of those is given a particular property in AR or VR. So I can see the way the light and the color and so on works. But look at the one on the right. You can see the polygons, low poly. So this is not low res. This is not just taking a CAD drawing, for example, of a building and exporting it as low res. What you need to do is you need to render that piece of clothing out in real time on your device. So the one on the left would be rendered on a render farm, and when 5G comes along, those things could be rendered on the cloud and served up to your devices. But in the meantime, you've got to build them in this low poly way. And I would say to you, whatever business you're in, if you are not building digital twins of your products in this way, you are going to be left behind. So if you're a retailer or you're a FMCG, the very least that you need to do is be ready to have a digital twin of your product in this low poly methodology. And that's really the gold rush that nobody is seeing in this AR VR space. By the way, this brown square on the left is that couch unwrapped. And that's another whole part of the equation, which we can leave for another day. So just the last thought on this is that, okay, so we want to do virtual meetings and conferences or whatever it might be. So who am I? Who am I in that world? Who am I walking up to? Who am I interacting with? Well, no, it must be as lifelike as possible. Well, actually, there's this very, very weird thing that happens in our psychology, is that when I start making a digital asset, so you can see Obama on the right there, and you can see the low poly way of it. On the left there, something that's much more realistic. It's just a higher resolution, sort of a higher poly version of it. But there seems to be something kind of creepy about it. And certainly if you look at the one at the bottom, and that's because at a very fundamental human level, when something starts to look more and more lifelike, I enjoy it, I engage with it, until we hit a point, and that's what's called the uncanny valley. So people in robotics experience the same phenomena, and that is when I start to see something that is too realistic, but I know at a fundamental human level that is not, that's what the uncanny valley is about. It becomes creepy. So now I'm sitting in a virtual meeting, and now I need to see an avatar of me. What? You mean like a kid's little avatar from Fortnite? And you expect me to go to a conference dressed like that, looking like some cartoon character? Well, actually, yeah, we think, and the future of this is going to be about our avatars, and that suspension of disbelief and the way that we conduct ourselves. I think the rules are still being written about that. But yeah, that's why we're seeing emoticons. That's why that trend towards these things makes sense. So just in closing, and some of you might have been scared to death at the last Innovation Summit. If not, we promise to do it next time. But we took this and we built a hyper-realistic virtual reality simulation for ArcelorMittal. Very simple use case. You come to us, not us, but them. So what's called location-based VR, because we realized everyone didn't have devices. So it used to be 2 weeks of health and safety training, 5 minutes of assessment. We just took the 5 minutes assessment, made a VR version, swapped it around, and the ROI on this was about a day. So in the first intake of 100 people, they kind of made their money back on this. And we're rolling this out for other use cases. So just to give you 5 more minutes on this, and then we can wrap, and I apologize for running on a little. But the challenges that we've got is none of this really works until we figure out who pays. So as Michael Jordan says, don't tell me about your idea, tell me about who the customer is and why they're going to pay for it. In social media, nobody's paying. Well, not really, as we know, because if you don't, you get it. And the platforms seem to have at least stabilized for now. Entertainment's interesting because it used to be paid for almost exclusively by advertising. Now it's massively driven by subscriptions. Commercial guys are saying, but actually it's all my money. You know, all of the advertisers and all of the big commercial companies out there saying, but we the guys that actually are putting the money into this process. And then, of course, as far as education is concerned, we've got this very weird idea that we abdicate and we pay our taxes so that government pays it and then parents pay. But corporates, well, it's nice to have, but yeah, you know, we pay a little bit of it. So you can see actually none of the conceptual or production challenges really dictate this. It's really around the business models. And really, just in summary, we need to think about and now do understand what the true use case is for digital. You know, if it wasn't clear why there was such a high cost to the environment and to time and everything for face-to-face. So people always used to say, you know, oh, VR is very expensive. And we say, yeah, except compared to all your alternatives, you know, and that by which we mean think about all the applications. And definitely it's maturing enormously. And the crisis has had one big advantage, that it's kickstarting VR, but it's also making people think about AR and games as a way to structure interactions. Bear in mind with VR, you still need the device, and there are just not a lot of devices out there. But we do need to think about how this immersive technology, which is still driven by this idea that it's going to be about games. I don't know why people think that teenagers sitting on their couch in their underpants is the biggest market for this. They simply are not. They're not even in the gaming industry, by the way, big secret. It's 35 to 55-year-old women. It's called Candy Crush. And then heavy industries are like, we get it. But I think it can affect all of our businesses. So just to wrap up, it's always about putting the customer and the user at the center of this. Why should they care? Why should I come back? It speaks to this idea of voluntary. Don't think about your idea. Think about who's going to distribute it. And perhaps, you know, if we can add one thing into this, the subtlety and the lack of ability to measure intrinsics as well as we can intrinsics should be no excuse for making bad interactions, because it is really the magic lies in the intrinsics. And clearly you can see that we don't believe in using technology for its own sake, and let's rather do fewer things better. And so with that, I'll leave you with this model again to say it's really around the why, and that's the most important thing. And then we'll figure out the how. But if you had to focus on one thing, it's really about how we're going to make money and distribute this in the new world order. Thank you very much indeed. I'm Glenn from Sea Monster. We believe that animation and games can change the world. Is anyone still there? Is anyone still there?
Glenn, there's 4 questions. Can you maybe go through them? Can you open them and answer them? Let's start there. And I think there was one question that wasn't, we tried to transfer the questions to the Q&A because it got lost in all the chats. And also I see Zoom is changing at a fast speed because all of a sudden you can send chats to the panelists and you can send chats to private people. And I thought, you know, I'm answering everybody, then I'm only answering one person, and sometimes I'm answering everybody. So from week to week, we must also keep up. But it's good then. There was one question that I picked up in the chats that asked, that you must share your trust links. You did research on trusts, so okay, I don't know whether that's possible, and then you can go through these.
Perfect. Thanks, Audrey. Yeah, so the Edelman Barometer, it's not ours. It's they kindly share some of it in the public domain. So EDELMAN, just Google them, and they've been doing it for the longest time, and they do all of that research. I'll just pick up on Louise's question here, which is really around building a digital twin, and I'm glad that you asked that. And how is that affordable for a small business and startups? Look, I need to understand the context of that a little bit more, but yeah, what we're hoping is that with this common standard, which is going to emerge from Apple and Google, if they can get over themselves and agree on something, is that more and more of these assets will come into existence. In other words, if the city of Cape Town, for example, could take our digital twin and embrace that as a standard, not because it's ours, because we would literally gift it and make it open source, then other people could come in. And so, for example, if you are doing infrastructural development or any of those kinds of things, you can actually all use the same digital twin. So there are cities like Houston, as an example, who have mandated an open standard for all of their AR and VR stuff, and they can do everything from safety and emergency planning and stuff. But look, the stuff doesn't need to be massively complicated. You know, yes, there's going to be a demand for 3D people to build these assets, but just start familiarizing yourself with it. We have a couple of white papers on it, and it's not a difficult thing to kind of find out more, but just take very cautious steps and be careful of any 3D artist who says, oh, I can just export that as a low res. Then they haven't yet understood it. The magic words are low poly, and we can go from there. Penny, how many businesses struggling to optimize the remote space? The tech is not staffed, not empowered. Okay, let me just go through this a little bit more coherently. So what Penny's doing is saying the remote working, the tech, the connectivity is an issue. And IT staff not able to shift to a creative way. What is needed to upscale critical skills, and how could we deliver quality learning and experience quickly to support businesses? Penny, that's a really fantastic question, and I think that, you know, this is where our passion lies. I know you know. We just got to stop doing things that no longer work. I mean, our education system is in a crisis, and yet we continue to throw more money in it. We continue to subject our children to having to go through a bloody content-heavy strategy. Why are we not focusing on growth mindset, on communication, on empathy? We need to go back to basics. Our president calls them fourth industrial revolution skills, and of course he's right. It's also called common sense, man. If it's not about the knowledge, it's got to be about the attitude and the skills. And yet there is this massive misalignment. So I just say to you that if we could do one thing, and that is that let's stop fighting the last war perfectly and imperfectly prepare ourselves for the next war. And that requires us to going back to basics, having children and young adults and adults being able to look at each other in the eye, put ourselves in each other's shoes. Empathy is the beginning of design thinking. So we've got to stop doing things that don't work anymore. Victorine's comment here is, how do we scale up this type of fun but educational apps across Africa? Let me know when you know. But no, very seriously, we occupy ourselves with very little else. It is all about the distribution, and I would say to you, do not spend 80-90% of your efforts building a business model and not really about the idea. Get the basic idea. But there are people in East Africa I know who are, for a few US cents a month, are offering educational content, and they have tens, if not hundreds of thousands of subscribers, because of course parents, once they put a roof over the head of their kids and have fed them, education is the next big opportunity. So there are business models out there, and in fact they're going to come from disruption. They are typically not going to come from big organizations. That's where the opportunity exists for all of us. There is no easy answer to it, but yeah, we need to disintermediate, to use the fancy term. You know, if we can do little Netflix subscription-based models, we can find out how to scale those. Those are models of the future. Okay, Edelman, cool, got it. Helene, sorry. How could startups include some of these elements into their business models? What would be affordable? I think it's a great question, and it varies from organization to organization. You know, if you're in a manufacturing business, just start thinking very simply per that previous question around, you know, what my digital twin is going to be. You might not yet have a very clear idea about where and how you're going to use that. But when Audrey phones you from the Innovation Summit and says, listen, the next summit is going to be digital and virtual, you're going to say, I'm ready for it because I actually have my product to show in a digital way. And oh, by the way, I can flick that into somebody's living room in an augmented way, and I can do some product education, some remote training. So I would say you don't always need to know where you're going to end in order to know where to start. Did I just make that up? I'm sure somebody smarter than me said that first. And with the digital space, it didn't sound tweetable, so somebody else said it before me. I'm sure I make this guy up. Anyway, so, but the point is, like, just start on it. So, you know, if you're the physical manufacturing space, just think digital twins, think remote training, think product education, and get on that. If you're in the knowledge space, you've got to be all over this. You know, think about leadership training, which is not maybe happening face to face now, but might take some time to do. Well, why don't you do something that says, okay, so here's an AR toy. Think about a Jenga puzzle done in augmented reality, for example. 8 people working completely remotely come in and try and solve some Jenga type AR puzzle on their floor. Okay, how did that work? Terribly. Let me give you 40 minutes of some high-level thought leadership about remote teams and working. Cool. Here's a little digital escape room that you now need to collaborate on. We've completely reinvented what leadership training or communication or team building looks like, but we haven't really. We've just taken it and we've made it digital, and we've thought about those fundamental human truths and how they might be expressed in a digital way. We're not, people are still going to be people, unfortunately and fortunately.
So I wonder whether we shouldn't ask anybody to put up their hands. Where's that facility, Buntu, to put up your hand if you want to say something? Then we can unmute.
There should be a hand just below if you have any question and you want to comment, and then we can unmute you quickly. So I'm also invited. I see there is another question here from Mylene. She says, I'm in education and our problem is the Department of Education that manages all the exams. Not sure how we're going to get to them to start looking at more IT solutions for learning. Not sure, maybe that's more of a comment, hey, Mylene, but maybe you have a thought on it.
Yeah, I mean, it breaks my heart, you know. There's so many good people in the Department of Education, and they know that it's fundamentally broken. And it's such a classic example, you know, and our unions are really struggling to embrace the new model. Teachers are going to be more important than ever. We need them to get out from the front of the class and come and stand next to us and be our mentors and our guides. And yet here we are talking about, you know, caps, and oh my God, you know, we're just fighting the last war, man. And we need to stop that nonsense. And we need to use this crisis as an opportunity to say, what does this look like? And not just for rich kids, because we're just going to further entrench the problem. So Mylene, I'm with you, man. Just go out there and just, you know, keep saying the same thing to them. Stop doing things that don't work, guys. It's called innovation. You know, the clue is in the name.
There was a hand, but the hand disappeared. And I see, Brian, you're writing to panelists. If you want everybody to see it, you can share it with everybody. You said here, for your information, we have virtual exponential leadership programs and masterclasses, as well as reflective digital coaching platforms. We really don't mind if you guys write what you do, but make sure that everybody can see it. So write it to all attendees. You're welcome to do so.
Brilliant, Brian. And yeah, I'm a huge fan of your work, and you guys are absolutely leading the way in terms of what's possible. So thank you for mentioning that. So yeah, definitely talk to Brian, and I'm sure, like all of us, he will share the love and the learnings, and you know, we're all figuring this out, man. The new normal is like everyone's making it up as we go along, but there are some rules.
Some last two questions here, maybe before closing. I see here Samuel has a question saying, apart from Slack, is there any other effective remote working channels you recommend?
Yeah, and all of them, Samuel. You know, there are many different things, and they do have their advantages and disadvantages. I think that, you know, don't overwhelm your teams with too many things. There are some very good routines from the real world that work and can very easily be transported. So little huddles, 15-minute, very quick, high-level things, check-ins, stand-ups. You know, a lot of this terminology that we've been borrowing from Agile actually really applies in the remote learning, remote working. I prefer to call them distributed teams. I think it's a better word. But yeah, you know, Zoom is actually proving to be a real winner. I know they're dealing with some security concerns at the moment. There are a lot of them, and just choose a few platforms for different things. We are a big believer in Google Docs and Google Drive. It's, again, not a perfect technology, but it does allow you to share. And then we just watch very closely everything that Amazon do. You know, AWS particularly is so strategic in everything that they do. And so I just, yeah, again, just keep watching. They don't always have consumer facing tools, but their technology is often the thing that's making everything else possible. So yeah, do always keep a track on it, but don't overthink it, dude. Choose a few, use them, and they're all perfectly imperfect.
We need to end the session, but are you going to take one more last question, and then that will be the last?
Can devices such as the Samsung 10 with 3D camera be a cost-effective solution? Yes. Okay, Helene again. So this, just in closing then, this is a question really around where the devices are going, and I'm going to reinterpret that slightly. So actually what's happening with all the new devices is that they are becoming scanning devices. You know, the photography game is kind of over. You know, how much resolution does any one human being need? But really, if you start to see what both Samsung and Apple are doing, is they're actually training their devices to become scanners. And so as I look around the world, more and more that technology is actually scanning and recreating digital twins. So definitely that's the way to kind of go with it, to watch what they're doing. Understand yet that there's no way to what's called auto decimate. So decimate means take that high poly and make a low poly. But as the AI gets better at it, that's the real win here. Apple and Google are all over this. They are creating the digital twins. Best we keep on track of that, because essentially they've just turned all of us into us showing them the world around them. And they're like, oh, thank you very much. I know exactly what's in your lounge. I know exactly what your couch looks like. So you can only imagine where that's going to go. But yes, modern phones are really powerful scanning devices now more than ever before.
Glenn, thank you so much. Team, thank you for setting this up and supporting all the attendees and the panelists. We will send to everybody a copy of Glenn's presentation. I'm sure your contact details will be in it. So you are welcome. Thank you for participation. Thank you for all the questions. And thank you for your time. We honor you. And let's meet again. We're going to take a break over Easter for 2 weeks, and we'll continue with this webinar series in 2 to 3 weeks from now, but we'll let everybody know. Thank you very much.
Thank you from my side too. Huge gratitude. Thank you for the opportunity. I hope it was worthwhile. Cheers, guys.
Amazing. Thanks, Glenn.
Thanks
safe.
a lot, Glenn. Stay safe, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.